Well, hello everybody. My name is Ralph Schultz. Welcome to my YouTube broadcast, video number 7. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Ukraine today, about the Odessa massacre. There's some pretty ghastly pictures there. Burned people. Some of you may know about this. Occurred in June or summer of 2014 in Odessa, Ukraine. And a little bit about what's going on today, a couple minutes, and in the Ukraine with Russia, the USA, and so on. And then my book, the pages that are left from the Ukraine section. Okay, I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it's warm here today. It's kind of warm. It's 50 degrees. It's 50 a lot during the wintertime. So, I thought you might find that interesting. One thing I want to suggest is some of you subscribe, then send me your email via the email that I broadcast, which will be shown here in a moment. It's confidential, and then I can send you a draft electronic copy of the book for free. It'll be on on Google Memory and on the cloud, but you can save it and look at it and forward it to other people who you might be interested. So far, nobody's done it. Come on. And how about some comments? What do you think? Do you think Ukraine, Russia has a right to a sphere of influence in the Ukraine or not? Let me know. Put some comments up there. Let's go. Okay, so there's been a lot of meetings the last week. The last big one was Lavrov, Secretary Foreign Affairs for Russia, and Secretary of State Blinken of the United States. And Russia has 3 basic demands when you get down to it. No Ukraine promise never in NATO or other countries in Eastern Europe. No military exercises in the Ukraine, and no weapons deployment in Eastern Europe, although a lot are still there. Romania, Poland, U.S. weapons were there before this recent crisis. Over the last several years, they were put into Romania and Poland to defend against an attack from Iran. So, there's controversy now. Germany's on the fence. They need that Nord Stream 2 natural gas to heat 31% of their population, and they're wondering if it's worth it to have severe sanctions, and Russia might have problems delivering the gas or the amount they need. There'll be financial problems, and is it really worth it for Germany to risk the welfare of its population for an idealistic notion for a country 600 miles away that for the whole idea of democratic liberalism, we must defend the sanctity of borders? Seems foolish to me. If I was Germany, I would just say, okay, it's not a nice thing. We prefer Russia does not use violence, excuse me, but we're not going to participate in any severe sanctions. Did you know Russia is also the number one exporter of wheat in the world now? A lot of these European countries have connections that want to develop trade with Russia. My friend Ilya does it in Moscow. He's a lawyer. And so it's getting more complicated. And as far as who knows if Russia is going to attack with weapons, there might be some cyber issues. The British intelligence has said that there are people in the Ukraine capital that are going to try to have a coup and establish a new government. There could be some sort of chaos there, particularly if Russia appears to ready to invade. And the idea would be to get not necessarily a Russian government, but a government that is more favorable to Russia and would stop all this nonsense about forbidding the Russian language and teaching young students in school to have a bad attitude about Russia. It's a bad place. It's true. That's what they're saying anyway. They're really doing everything they can. It's this group that has this one attitude that seems to have taken hold in the capital. So anyway, that's what could happen, and I don't want to belabor it. There's a lot of things you can see on YouTube about the existing situation. So now it's the fun time. I get to read you your bedtime story. A lot of you will start falling asleep or look for some more entertainment somewhere else, but I have a few dedicated people who want to empower themselves, make spend the next 15, 18 minutes listening to me talk. Okay? And that's the way it is. That's why I did this, to broadcast my book to the world, because nobody's buying it. Nobody knows. Self-publishing doesn't work, by the way. You know, if you're not sponsored by a major publisher, you're going to be lucky if you sell 200 books. You may sell 10, 40. Once your web of people who know you run out, and they're friends, it's not going to work, just to let you know. So whoever watches this decides to get free electronic book or even buy one, I really appreciate it, because it's a waste of intellectual energy that I have and knowledge without being ordained as somebody you have to listen to on TV. Okay? So if you look on page 88, you'll see 3 pictures. Well, they're going to come on in a moment, of Odessa. The burning building, people running, jumping out of windows, and burnt bodies afterwards of the, 50 people or so who were fled to that building during a riot in Odessa. And they were basically pro-Russians. And they were attacked and run in there by the anti-Russian groups. Some were the Nazi types, but who knows in that crowd. And they were surrounded and they were not allowed to get out. And Molotov cocktails were thrown in there to start a fire. And some jumped, some were shot, some may have escaped, but it was a massacre. And nobody will talk about it in the Ukraine or the U.S. because nobody wants to believe it's true. Okay? It happened. So, there were 48 Ukrainian Russian civilians that were locked into a government building in Odessa, Ukraine on May 2nd, 2014. Odessa has a large Russian population that was not in favor of the new Kiev government they considered illegitimate. For several days, peaceful demonstrations were occurring which turned to violence. The pro-Russian group of civilians, women, and children ran into the building for refuge from an attacking crowd led by a right-wing neo-Nazi paramilitary group from western Ukraine. The building was set on fire by throwing Molotov cocktails. They surrounded the building and prevented any rescue by police or fire while these innocent people burned to death to prove a point to the population not to favor Russia. And by the way, there were other pictures I saw of young women, we'll say they were teenagers in their 20s, actually making Molotov cocktails, which is putting some kind of kerosene in a glass bottle with a rag tied to it as the fuse, and you fling it in there, and it starts a fire. It wasn't faked. It's not something just made up. Okay, so you can see it in YouTube very clearly. So, they were made by young women nearby. Go ahead, check it out. Also, it was apparent that agent provocateurs were present that were dressed in terror disguises, pretending to be part of the pro-Russians, shooting into the Ukrainian crowd, their own people, to provoke them into attacking the pro-Russian demonstrators and create chaos. It worked. In the video, you see these disguised armed men talking with the local police, revealing their true affiliation. It illustrates their willingness to use radical violence to achieve their anti-Russian aims. This was widely disseminated in the news and not conjecture, but it has never been fully investigated by the Ukrainian or local government and ignored by the Western press. Civil wars are horrible. The agent provocateurs were also at the Maidan demonstration in Kiev and instigated violence against the then existing government. They were also an integral part of the February 2014 political coup that caused the government to flee under fear of violence and ushered in the current government. I mean, the president of Ukraine at that time literally ran out of town to catch a plane to Russia. It was like you see in some kind of movie. There was mobs in the street. Okay. The current government is highly influenced by the Svoboda Party, which means Freedom Party, originated in western Ukraine with many members in key political positions. It was originally named the Socialist Nationalist Party of Ukraine in 1940 and was pro-Nazi during World War II and was renamed Svoboda Party in 2004. It is the strongest far right-wing party in Europe and intended to banish the Russian language, although it is the primary language of 33% of Ukraine and the second language of the other 67%. And they were going to institute harsh anti-Russian laws, which has happened. This includes elementary schools depicting Russia as evil and an enemy and banning all Russian movies. All statues of Lenin were destroyed, but a monument to World War II Ukrainian Nazi leader Stephen Bandera was erected in Kiev. The interim prime minister from February to May 2014, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, was picked by the USA foreign policy officials in Ukraine and had close ties to the Svoboda party. He is an educated economist and lawyer who desired Ukraine to join the European Union and NATO and break all ties with Russia, which he considered a continuation of the Soviet Union control of Ukraine. And maybe that's true. And by the way, I have a Russian friend here who says, no, Ralph, you're buying the Russian narrative. That's not what really happened. But I don't believe him. He has a PhD, and he's from Leningrad. He's lived here 20 years. But he helped me with a few little technical aspects of the book and so on. But no, this happened, okay? Interestingly, some of Yatsenyuk's roots are traced back to Romania, not Russia. Prior to 2012, the Svoboda Party platform included these points: reunification of the 210 Kharkov Agreement that Russia's Black Sea Fleet will remain in Crimea through 2042. Renunciation of that. You see why Russia was so concerned about taking over the Crimea. Abolition of Crimean autonomy, nationalization of major industries, greater state control of the banking system, and a ban on privatization of land. Hello there? That isn't what that's very radical. Much more so than the current Ukrainian government and anything the USA would love to see there. Okay? So, holy cow, Christine Lafarge, the French finance minister. Now, she's president of the IMF and former finance minister of France and Russia. You think Russia is going to lose control and abandon its main naval base in Crimea, that is, Sevastopol? All this is fighting words. Today, Ukraine is still struggling to unify and almost appears to be a composition of feudal-like independent regions controlled by local wealthy oligarchs, some even with their own paid militia. Although fearful and resentful of Russia, Ukraine was supported economically by Russia and is culturally and politically similar. Most of Ukraine is not neo-Nazi, but these influential groups fuel the flames of anti-Russian attitudes in the war against the Donbass separatists, and it makes Russia nervous. It would make me nervous too. So I was raised by a Ukrainian stepfather amid his Ukrainian relatives and friends. They were wonderful and friendly, loyal Americans. My stepfather, John Chubati, used to try to imitate those Cossack dancers, crouching down and kicking their legs out in front of them. He was pretty funny. The Ukrainians are great people. Now the Ukraine, Russia, and perhaps Germany and Poland need a year-long peace conference, just as the U.S. and Vietnam did in 1970 to 73. Compromises need to be made. Ukraine cannot any longer be torn apart. The U.S. needs to take a more passive role in this process. It is primarily a European geopolitical issue. If Russia extended the war, the U.S. could intervene if it thought very necessary. The U.S. also does not need to provide $1 trillion of lethal military arms to the Ukrainian army either, as was being proposed then by Congress. But there's been like $2.5 billion put in since 2015, and what, $600 million this year. 200 tons of armaments just were landed in Kiev here January 21st, 2022. Okay, so we're putting in killer javelin weapons and who knows what else, plus ammunition, the long-range sniper rifles. So the total 2018 aid was $200 million. And $400 million has been sent there in the value of the armaments in 2021. Okay? That money could be used for good purposes in the U.S., like dental care for adults, seniors. Any war there that I remember, I wrote this in 2019-ish, 18-19. The Donbass simmering conflict was continuing. Artillery was occasionally bombarding, but it's a war that Ukraine can't defend itself against or win, if there really was a major one, without extremely highly lethal aid from Western Europe and the United States, and probably soldiers and missiles and aircraft. Okay. So far, that was 3 years ago, the European Union had given $7 billion. This is for rebuilding the country as terms of loans, and is upset that Ukraine was still of corruption and politically unstable. Russia owed at least $10 billion for prior assistance in natural gas to Russia. The Ukraine economy is not strong enough to repay these massive amounts. So Ukraine is trying to hold itself together so it does not become a failed state. So Russia could help, if and probably would. Probably the USA and Western Europe should help rebuild Ukraine as well. Okay, and it already has with $7 billion from the International Monetary Fund. So it remains, poverty remains high. The Ukrainian economy has been showing some improvement. The currency is weak, encouraging exports which are limited but making the cost of living higher. Okay, the IMF has advanced Ukraine, like I said, about $7 billion to restructure so it's become a viable country. In fact, the money is really a gift because there's no way Ukraine will ever pay that back. The repayment is Ukraine's allegiance and dependence to the West, Europe, and the USA for geopolitical purposes, and of course some of the citizens' well-intentioned ideals that life would be better detached from Russia. Not sure about that. It could be better to have some attachment to both. Actually, the Russian debt should take payment precedence over the IMF debts. The IMF and the European Union have so many restrictions and stringent qualifications that Ukraine will have difficulty meeting them to join the EU or the NATO. It's not that easy. Ukraine is a very risky investment because of the unstable political situation and military situation. Okay, I talk a little more here. I'm going to skip it about Eurobonds and speculative investments in the Ukraine, which I'm going to skip over here. So some practical political solution, something I mentioned here. Okay, the Ukraine, the United Nations, and NATO must recognize Crimea is now in the Russian Federation. Period. Got it? Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, the Black Sea city port of Mariupol, and a pathway to Crimea along the Black Sea might possibly be granted to Russia as a protectorate. This region severs ties with Ukraine. This is my solution, at least 3 years ago. Think I was crazy? Far western Ukraine, the Lvov area, is granted a measure of degree of independence. If they want it, I read. If they don't, then let it be. Okay? It would be a quasi-independent region west of Ternopil into Poland. Okay? This was being considered then, or rumors were coming around. So since 1600, Western Ukraine has been part of Poland for much of its history, even during the 20th century prior to World War II. So as I was saying, a lot of Western and Central Europe occupied Western Ukraine. Okay, there were also 25,000 Poles massacred there by the Ukrainian pro-Nazi militia back in the I believe it was the 20s or teens. In 1931, the primary language of the population of Lvov was Polish. Okay, 63%. Only 12% spoke Ukrainian. It was the third largest city in Poland. Poland also tried to change the culture and make it more Polish. Ukrainians were repressed. All Ukrainian college professors were purged and dismissed. This is in the 1910 to 25-ish era. In 1918, the Western Ukrainian People's Republic was formed as a result against Poland, but was defeated militarily by Poland. Austrian Habsburgs also had influence and invited Western Ukrainians to become representatives in their government. In 1900, Western Ukraine was part of the German Austro-Hungarian Empire, and German culture was introduced. Romania also has had an influence. In 1985, the People's Movement of Ukraine was formed and is being reconstituted now. Its goal is to eliminate Russian influence and a resurgence of Russian control of Western Ukraine. This area was instrumental in the Maidan in 2014 and has created militias with Nazi symbols to fight Russia in the Donbass today. Arseniy Yatsenuk is from Chernivtsi in far southwestern Ukraine and was appointed by the USA as interim president from February to May of 2014. The city was part of Romania from 1918 to 1945 and also Moldavia and Romania from 1359 to 1775. 300 years, right? 400. In 1930, only 18% of the city was Ukrainian, another 21% German, 23% Romanian, and 27% Jewish. In April 2016, the city banned the use of the word Russia on billboards, advertising, and any public board. This is rather confusing with these dates, I understand, but you get the impression. The point I am making is that this area and its peoples do not have a strong historical and cultural connection to Russia in eastern Ukraine. Today the city is 80% Ukrainian as other ethnic groups were forced out. Petro Poroshenko was elected president of Ukraine in May 2014. It is interesting he is from eastern Ukraine and is an extremely wealthy oligarch with a huge business that makes chocolate, and Russia was the company's main source of sales. They call him the Chocolate King. During World War II in 1943, the Ukrainian Resurgent Army, affiliated with Nazi Germany, massacred over 25,000 Poles from Lvov. Western Ukraine was never part of the former Russian Empire, yet this region is extremely anti-Russian. Soviet Russia eventually acquired control of this area in World War II. After the Treaty of Riga in 1921, when Soviet Russia defeated the weak Ukrainian People's Republic near Kiev, Western Ukraine was divided among Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria-Hungary. Nikita Khrushchev and Leonid Brezhnev, the Russian Soviet leaders from 1954 to 1984, came from the Ukraine, from the eastern part. Yes, it is very complex. My point is that you can see far western Ukraine was under control of Central European nations and developed a connection with them and culture that was far different than Russia and eastern Ukraine. Western Ukraine effectively was part of Poland for many years, and back to 1667. Today, much of the Ukrainian government is influenced by Western Ukraine. Many also believe this region accelerated the Maidan peaceful demonstrations into violence and thereby motivated Eastern Ukraine to rebel in the Donbass with Russian support. Their violent militia in Kiev in February was responsible for chasing out the pro-Russian government and causing the political coup that destroyed the agreement that called for a free election in 10 months and encouraged peace. Since that time, the Ukrainian government has created a country dedicated to hating Russia, banned the Russian language, and teaches small children Russia is an enemy intent on destroying Ukraine. 6 million Ukrainians did perish in 1933 when Stalin cut off their food supply, but he also killed many more Russians during his purges. He's a tough guy. I don't have anything to say about that. After World War II, Ukraine became an important part of the Soviet Union and contained most of their defense industry. Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine in 1954, I believe, as restitution for this horror. I think the USA has to sit down with Russia and simply ask Russia, what is it you want? Well, Russia's telling everybody now. I don't think this simple question has been addressed face to face. It wasn't 3 years ago. Rather, it is the EU and NATO, the US telling Russia what it should do, how it should act, what it should believe. Naturally, Russia reacts. With their concerns in hand, the West can respond and seek out a compromise. Do it now, please. Well, it is being done. But as long as Western democratic liberalism says you stepped over this line, there is no sphere of influence allowed in our ism. Nothing's going to happen. You know, we'll see what happens. But you got real practical historical politics against a ism, a philosophy, and that's like a religion. That's really hard to break. So I'll see you guys next time, and we'll talk a little bit about more of the United States, some interesting things about it, how war could develop in the Black Sea, and I'll see you then. Take care and have a good week. Bye-bye now.